Welcome. My name is Mark Lippert. I'm the Client Success Manager here at Proaxiom, and I'm here with my CEO, Mark Woodhouse. And today we're just having a general discussion around some of the things that we're seeing working with customers in cybersecurity who are either uplifting the cybersecurity posture in one way or another, achieving compliance, wanting to reduce their insurance premiums, and just get in better shape moving into 2025. So Mark, over to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, look, probably start with talking a bit about the compliance frameworks that are out there at the moment, and some of, I guess, some of the starter bits of information that are useful to know about them. So, there are a number of compliance frameworks out available in the market for different types of industries and different purposes. And I guess when it comes to information security management and data protection, here in Australia, we're really looking at a couple of key frameworks. So that would be the ASD Essential Eight, the ISO 27001 International Standard for Information Security Management Systems, and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is a North American framework. Now, I'll probably focus in a little bit on, let's just pick ISO 27001 as a starter, because ASD Essential 8, we've talked about this in a previous blog. It's a bit more, I guess, a bit less risk-based and doesn't have the same amount of control finesse that the more complex frameworks do. So using ISO as the example, some of the things that we are, I guess, finding we have the same process with the customer is that we find that people tend to jump towards implementing the controls, and mainly starting with the policies. And so the way that ISO 27001 is hung together is that it consists of ISO 27001 itself, which is a set of requirements that the organization needs to comply with around its information security management. So clauses 4 through 10 of the standard are a set of requirements that you need to adhere to. And then you've got ISO 27002, which is also referred to as Annex A of ISO 27001. So they're essentially the same thing. It's in the 2022 version of the standard, they've aligned Annex A with ISO 27002. Essentially, ISO 27002 gives you more detailed information about each of the security controls, but that's what that is. Annex A, ISO 27002, is a list of security controls. There's 93 of them. And you apply those security controls to manage the risk exposure of your organization, particularly when it comes to your information, your data.
Thanks. That's really insightful. I think from a non-technical standpoint, which is where I'm coming from, I'd be interested to know, like, what are the signals for a customer to decide to head towards compliance in any one of these frameworks? Is it that they've been, potentially breached or burnt? Is it that they're trying to, just increase their protection? Is it for achieving better insurance rates? Like in our experience, what kind of signals are usually leading a client towards heading towards compliance?
Yeah, great question. So for the most part, every organization is in some way currently protecting their data and protecting their environment, right? So it would be sort of remiss to make the statement or the assumption that people just don't have protection in place, because typically they do.
Yeah.
What the frameworks do is they allow, I guess, a top to bottom alignment in the organization as to what the standard is that we're trying to achieve and align with. So, for a starter, it gives a very clear definition of what good looks like, right? So that as people that are implementing the controls or, aligning the organization's ISMS with the requirements in the standard, we can be very clear that, okay, we're either compliant or we're not compliant with this area of the standard. The other thing that's great about it is that it gives the executive team and the management team and even the board of directors, it gives them something that's quite referenceable. So it's a lot easier for an executive team to mandate to the organization, hey, we want to be compliant with the standard because it's the internationally recognized standard for information security management, as opposed to saying, hey, can you guys just please make sure that you aren't letting the bad guys in and that
Yeah.
all our data is safe, right? Like that's very subjective and pretty loose. So there are benefits certainly in that space, and then also, as you know, there are other areas where you've got suppliers or contracts where being compliant with a recognized framework might be a condition or certainly looked upon favorably. And also then you do branch out into other areas like cyber insurance, cyber risk insurance, where potentially the premiums that your insurance provider is going to offer you would be lower if you can demonstrate compliance with NIST or with ISO or any of the other sort of major frameworks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so this undertaking to go, moving towards compliance, that can take quite a bit of time.
It can. Yeah, it can. And look, I
Yes.
mean,
So I mean, in our experience, how long would a typical ISO 27001 compliance journey take, or is there no straight answer for that?
yeah,
Does it depend?
it would be unprofessional to try and put a time frame on
Yeah.
implementing ISO 27001. The best way to approach it is to really break it into the component parts of implementing and assuring yourself, for example, with ISO 27001. So the first stage is that you understand who you are as an organization, what your data is, and what you're trying to protect. So what integration points you have with other people where you're sharing data with them, what sort of data that is, who should be able to access that data, and for what purpose, and all those other bits. What is our business function? Who are we as an organization, and what data do we hold? And how important is it that we protect that data? There's a whole piece just at the start of establishing your ISMS, establishing your information security management system. And it doesn't have to be, trench warfare of trying to laboriously work through this, behemoth of, there's this real effort to try and figure out who we are. It can
Yeah.
actually be done quite rapidly and agile. I use the term often the lowercase a, agile, right? Just being
Yeah.
responsive, being adaptive, and using the information we've got to build on the as we go through the process. So that can take anywhere, from 6 weeks through to 3 or 4 months, depending on the complexity of the organization and the availability of people to work on it. Obviously, if you work, with a company like us, we can help to make that process a bit less, painful than it might otherwise be. And then off the back of that, you really establish what controls you need to implement. You establish your risk management processes if they don't already exist, or you make sure that they're fine-tuned and that they, I guess you've got integration of your risk management process in the organization from the cybersecurity and the IT team through to the corporate risk management process and GRC process. So you get that sort of integration working as it needs to. And then you go about essentially implementing the controls. So that's your second phase, is that you identify your risk as an organization, and then you essentially are working to bring that risk down to an acceptable level of risk for the organization, right? And in order to do that, you apply controls, and they can be policy, so organizational controls, they can be technology controls, they can be people controls, and they can be physical controls as well. They're the 4 types of controls that you apply.
So with, say, physical and technology controls, is that something that we, Proaxiom, would do as a company? We would help our client implement those controls, or is it something that they do internally and we're just kind of telling them that, this is how you would address that issue?
Yeah, look, again, it does depend. It depends on what the organization, the customer that we're working with, it depends what they need, right?
Yeah.
It can be as simple as providing some help and some guidance, or it can be right the way through to, I guess, sitting side by side and developing, policy
writing
and
policy
and
and
what have you. But like when you talk about physical controls, you know, an example can be, a clear desk policy, right? So that's a physical control that you would apply to protect the sensitive data in the organization. So, applying that physical control really is through a
what's a
process
clear
of,
desk? What's a clear desk policy?
oh,
Sorry.
just meaning that you don't have information on your desk at the end of the day when you leave the office
Yeah.
that
Gotcha,
can
gotcha.
be,
Yeah,
or that you don't leave your computer unlocked when you step away from it, right? So
yeah,
and so that's a policy that gets applied. And the way that you might do that, though, you need to really be working through what's the most effective way to achieve this security control in the organization without, like writing policy and just sticking a whole bunch of,
yeah,
policies into a policy folder and saying everybody's got to read this and then adhere to it. Not necessarily, the best
yeah. The most
approach.
effective. Yeah,
Not at all, right? Not at all. And there are better ways to do that and achieve the right outcome. It does still refer back to a policy, okay,
yeah,
because
yeah.
that's your ultimate control. But how you implement that control is something that, we work with our customers on to try and find the best way to land that security control in the organization and ultimately get the outcome that we're looking for, which is to, have people aware of why they need to safeguard the data of the organization and what they can do in order to help achieve that goal.
Makes sense. So, so when a company's embarking on the journey of, for example, ISO 27001 compliance, is it from the company side? Are we mainly just working with, say, the ICT manager or the IT department, or is there more buy-in from the other executives and staff? Is it like an organizational-wide process? Like how much like yeah, how much energy is required on the part of the company to make this journey happen?
Yeah, look, again, good question. I think something that we have encountered. I've certainly encountered this, is that typically an organization doesn't want to turn things absolutely on its head
Yeah,
in order
yeah,
to implement a framework like ISO 27001, right? So, if we all come down the road, torches blazing and pitchforks in hand, like we're going to protect, it's going to land terribly, right? So you need to work in with the organization. You need to be aware of the organization's acceptable rate of change, which is how quickly it can adapt to change. The current workload on the team of people that are supposed to be responsible for implementing this. There are a bunch of factors that you need to consider. But I think your question too was, like typically who are we working with in order to
yeah.
implement ISO 27001? And so it is very much the core people that we would be working with would be your information communication technology team, your ICT team. There is very much a reporting line or a line of engagement, more correctly, into the executive team. So, because there is, again, with these frameworks, and one of the great things about these frameworks is that there is essentially an executive commitment component to information security management in the organization. So you are looking for your CEO, for example, to be making a statement to the organization as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how important it is. And because that same CEO will be fronting the press release, when
Yeah.
if things ever went wrong. So that person and that executive team, they do need to be engaged and buy into this process, and that's something that I think happens as a byproduct of doing the actual project, right? You're typically, if you don't start with a mandate from the top to implement a framework like ISO 27001, then if you are moving that from the bottom up, which is an admirable approach, then one of the early stages is to ensure that we do have that management team buy-in and engagement and support in order to implement it. But I think also it's just worth touching on the fact that, as with anything, you have to take a measured and managed approach to how you implement things, right? Because too much change or just dumping things in and hoping for the best or overloading people that are already, at or near capacity, is not going to give the benefit that you're looking to achieve from it. So it does really start as well with making sure that we plan out the right way of approaching it on an organization by organization basis.
Okay, so I'm obviously mindful of time. Before we wrap up, what would you say to any potential customers who have been thinking about moving ahead with ISO 27001 compliance or any compliance framework, and they don't know where to start or what to do?
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, obviously, give us a call would be, easy.
Yeah.
But I think the fundamental thing is to start with understanding the basic building blocks of your ISMS is who we are as an organization, what is it that we do, what data do we hold, why does that data need to be protected, and you go through that process. It's called the context of the organization and understanding that, and that's really important. You throw the net out really wide and you get your hands around it, and then what you do is you go through a process of understanding, okay, is this data that I'm holding in my HR system around employees, is this data that we need to protect? Is my finance data, is my data on my customers, is my data on my suppliers, is this all data that needs to be protected by my organization? And that's where you then start to define your scope of your ISMS, right? What's in scope and what's out of scope for the ISMS. And that's the really important building block, foundational piece. Before you start running around trying to implement controls, is making sure that we understand what are we protecting and what's the risk. Because then as you're applying controls and at a future point, you're applying controls in order to address risk that you've identified that relates back to the data that you're trying to protect. So yeah, so to answer your question succinctly, the best way to start is by starting, by establishing the basis of your ISMS, which is to, go through that, the initial steps of understanding who we are and what we do.
And is that something that we can assist customers with if they want to do that, but they're not exactly sure how to pull all the pieces together, or they want, I guess, some hand railing to hold on to? Is that something that we can provide support with?
Yeah, I mean, there's also different ways to tackle it. I guess, well, there are a few different ways that you can tackle it. There are, templates available online and that sort of thing. Of course, you can go and start just working through them. We have a really good approach where we run a workshop up front, right? And that's your sort of context of organization workshop. And we'll spend 6 hours with the right people in the room with, the butcher paper up on the wall. That's the one. It's somewhere behind me in the backdrop there. We just did a workshop the other day, and it's so we've got plenty of post-it notes, and it's another way of also getting the right people engaged and making sure that the people that are going to be involved in the project are understanding why we're here and why we're doing this. And it also makes it a lot more fun than just sort of starting with document number one and working through, here's the document control section, and there's the objectives, and then here's the, that's just like an absolute killer of motivation, right? So we have a whole bunch of ways of working that we've tried out plenty of times, and we've worked out how to really get the most efficient way through that process. Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe we wrap it up here. What do you think?
Yeah, good idea.
Cool. Well, everyone, thanks for watching and listening. If you have any questions, please leave a note in the comments or reach out to us. And thanks, Mark, for sharing all your insights. It was awesome.
It was good. Thanks, Mark. Cheers.
Cheers.